Okay, continuing with Holy Grail Wisdom Quotes by E.P. Rogers. Jose Ortega y Gasset. He's a Spanish philosopher, writer of essays. His father owned a newspaper, so he's a little bit of a privileged life. He went to a Jesuit school when he was young, which is a good thing. The Jesuits were great for educating people. You know, Voltaire is an ungrateful bastard. He was educated by the Jesuits, and then after that he spends his life bashing Christianity. Now this guy, Gasset, there's a few things I like about him. I like about him that he's very pro-individualism and he tells the truth about some things in education. What I don't like about him, like a typical, he's a little bit of a chump for socialism. A lot of people were suckered into this socialism stuff. They don't understand. Socialism is the opposite of individualism. You can't be a socialist and an individualist at the same time. It's the highway to collectivism, which is the loss of individualism. So a lot of people don't get that. I mean, it's common to think that way when you're young just because you don't know any better. It seems that it's thoughtful and generous, but you get older and you realize it's nonsense, okay? The reason why capitalism is the greatest thing, and it'll always be the greatest thing, is it rewards people for effort and productivity, okay? Socialism punishes you. So anything that punishes good behavior is not a good system. Okay, Jose Ortega Gasset, he says, hatred is a feeling which leads to the extinction of values. Yeah, that's why they always want, when they want to get people drummed up for a big war, they always, basically always say, the opponent is a homicidal maniac and we must stop him before he gets us. So that's what they always say, okay? So they want you to dehumanize the opponent, then you'll be willing to do anything to them, okay? So that's kind of how it goes. All right, now this is getting into some of his good stuff where he's talking about being lost in a problem and trying to solve the problem and become educated on how to solve the problem. And this is where his best work is. To live is to feel oneself lost. He who accepts this has already begun to find himself, to be on firm ground. Yeah, that's why I tell people, you've been brainwashed in the public schools to think everything's okay. The system is there to help you. And if you think that way, you're doomed, okay? Because if you think that all you got to do is maintain the status quo and be like everybody else, you're going to have probably a terrible outcome because most people age very poorly. But if you say to yourself, oh my God, the food's poison, the water's poison, the sky's poison, holy crap, I got to learn how to survive in this mess, then you got a chance. Okay. Gasset continues, instinctively as do the shipwrecked, he will look around for something to cling to, and that tragic glance is sincere because it is a question of his salvation. It will cause him to bring order into the chaos of his life. These are the only genuine ideas, the ideas of the shipwrecked. All the rest is posturing and farce. Yeah, I recently had a young doctor, a real bright guy, good student, ask me, well, my wife's pregnant. Is there anything I should know about? And I'm like, do you filter your water? He's like, no. I said, are you low-fat vegan? He said, no. Do you eat organic only? He said, no. And that's a perfect example. And I was the same way when I was young. You could be smart in school. You could be super smart in school and an idiot in health and in real life. So it's just one of those things you have to learn. It's not given to us by revelation, intuitive. Okay, but I like this. Those are the genuine ideas, the ideas of the shipwreck. How do I fix this problem before it causes me real suffering? Okay, Gasset continues. Falling in love is an inferior state of mind, a form of transitory imbecility. Yeah, when a guy falls in love with a girl, man, he'll do incredibly stupid things. And basically, you do stupid stuff because you want her to like you and you want it to work. And then you realize you made a fool out of yourself and you say, man, I'll never do that again. Okay, let's see. The most radical division, this is Gasset, the most radical division it is possible to make of humanity is the split into two classes of creatures. The first are those who make great demands upon themselves, piling up difficulties and duties, and those who demand nothing special of themselves, but for whom to live is to be every moment what they already are, without imposing on themselves any effort towards perfection, mere buoys that float on the waves. And I think that's real common. I think most people are kind of like that, but if you're going to be a high achiever, man, you got to be pushing, because it's not easy to become really good at something. Okay, there's a lot of talented people, but to really develop a talent, it takes a lot of effort. Okay, now this is good. Gasset continues on education. He says, the average man studies in school because he is forced to, not because he wants to learn, and he does not learn. And so the enormous gap continues to grow between the genuine cultural knowledge of mankind and the average man. The root structure heritage of modern science and culture is not learned by the average man. And underneath the superficial veneer of modernity, he remains an uncultured barbarian, prone to violence. And this has led to humanity's return to barbarism. Now that's exactly correct. People think, oh, we live in the modern era. Just because you have, a cell phone and the internet, electric light bulb, that doesn't mean you're educated or modern at all. Just take a look at all the videos of what's happening in Europe right now, in England, in the streets. People don't understand. Things are far worse than people realize. I saw a video by this guy, Dr. DeHaan, and it's like he tries to mean well, but he's so ignorant. He says the stupidest things. He had a patient who was 106 years old, and the 106-year-old said, oh, things used to be much better in England. And DeHaan's like, oh, no, they're not. They're better now. Yeah, right. England is, in free fall, just destroying itself. It's terrible. It used to be you had to worry about, World War I, World War II, which certainly were disasters, but they were fixed events rather than just walking out in the street and all the problems in the street on a daily basis that are a million times worse now than they were in 100 years ago in England. Okay, the next quote of Gasset. He said, barbarism is the absence of standards to which an appeal can be made. Yeah, you're dealing with a violent, stupid person. You can't converse or negotiate with them. All you can do is avoid them. Okay, here he continues. The mass crushes beneath it everything that is excellent, individual, qualified, and select. Yeah, so he's kind of good on that. He believes in an aristocracy, and there has to be an aristocracy. As Will Durant said, education and culture are for the very few. There's very few people that want to read enough to develop a sophisticated understanding of history, literature, and art. But if you don't have those people, then all of society loses history, literature, and art, and you don't want that, okay? Ortega y Gasset says, tell me what you pay attention to, and I will tell you who you are. And I can tell you, like my ex-wife, won the lottery for $100,000. She would take off to Europe for a bunch of vacations and, stuff like that. Get her friend to go with her, okay? If I had $100,000, well, that wouldn't make much difference. But let's say I won $500,000 and I could retire early, I would just study all day long and write books and, make my YouTube channel. But you do YouTube channel videos. This is easy for me to do. This is kind of fun. I just do this at night, but when your brain is freshest in the morning, that's what I would do. That's what I value most in life because I think that's my calling, my destiny. But everybody's got that own thing for themselves, whatever it might be. Okay, Gasset, the will to be oneself is heroism. Yeah, it's not easy to be yourself in a world that's always beating you up saying you must conform, and then you have to do tedious stuff all day long to make a living. Okay, Gasset, civilization is nothing else but the attempt to reduce force to being the last resort. Effort is only effort when it begins to hurt. To wonder is to begin to understand. Now, I like that quote because, if you want to study biologists, the typical biology major in college, they don't know biology. They simply sign up to be a biology major, hoping to get into med school or something. And then they memorize whatever the teacher tells them, but they don't have any deep sense of it. You get a deep sense of biology when you try to answer biological questions. And also, you want to go outside and start bird watching. Then you get a sense of what's happening in nature. Or do something else, but get outside in nature and then you'll start to learn about it. Okay, Gasset continues. The man who discovers a new scientific truth has previously had to smash almost everything he had learnt and arrives at the new truth with his hands blood-stained from the slaughter of 1,000 platitudes. And that is true, like in modern medicine. If you figure out something new, unless you're figuring out how to sell a drug and make money for a big corporation, all you get is a piss flood of wrath. Everybody hates you. I can assure you this. There'll be young doctors who want to learn. There'll be doctors who secretly want to learn to help their patients. But the institution of health itself, the healthcare system, it does not want innovation. It does not want new discoveries. It doesn't want anything. except money. And that's why, people think, oh, modern science and medicine isn't great. You're like, you don't understand, you dummy. It's got very little to do with helping people. It's all about money. And that's why, you got the same problems. How much progress have we made in treating cancer in the last 50 years? Not much. How much progress have we made in curing diabetes, hypertension, obesity, coronary heart disease? Like zero in terms of increase in longevity, okay? These drugs make very little difference, okay? What makes a big difference? Low-fat vegan, which we've known about since the 1940s, but nobody wants to do it. Hardly anybody knows how well it works. Okay, Gasset. The metaphor is probably the most fertile power possessed by man. I like the next one. I am myself plus my surroundings, and if I do not preserve the latter, I do not preserve myself. Yeah, that's like you want America. You can't have America without Christian ethics. Without Christian ethics, America is just another third world crap hole. Okay, it's a fact. All the science nowadays, almost all of it's funded by corporations, all the big science, and it's all a bunch of lies to advertise their products. That's not real science. You need Christian ethics to have real science. You're not going to have a big scientific system that's honest unless you have Christian ethics, okay? And right now, Christian ethics are beaten, destroyed, and they're trying to make them illegal. And when that happens, man, it's only going to get worse. Okay, let's see here. A little bit more Gasset. I am myself plus my surroundings, and if I do not preserve the latter, I do not preserve myself. Okay? Our life is at all times and before anything else the consciousness of what we can do. Yeah, you're always trying to, what's the best I could do? It's a good question to ask yourself. What's the best I could do with the time I got left? What's the best I could do this month? What's the best I could do this year? That's exactly how I think when I say to myself, what book should I write next? What needs to be written? Okay? It is enough to compare the approach of a man who is going to study an already existing science with the approach of a man who feels a real, sincere, and genuine need for it. The former will not tend to question the content of the science or to criticize it. Yeah, that's your typical student. On the contrary, he will tend to comfort himself by thinking that the content that already exists has a defined value as pure truth. What he seeks is simply to assimilate it as it already is. On the other hand, the man who is needful of a science, who feels a profound necessity of truth, will approach this bit of ready-made knowledge with caution and full of suspicion. He who feels the profound necessity of truth will approach this with caution, submitting it to criticism, even assuming in advance that what the book says is not true. Yeah, that's how I read a medical book nowadays. It's probably not true, but let me see, maybe it's useful. In short, for the very reason that he needs with such deep anguish to know, he will think that this knowledge does not exist, and he will manage to unmake what is presented as already made. It is men like this who are constantly correcting, renewing, and recreating science. The fact is that the typical student is the one who does not feel the direct need of science, nor any real concern with it, and who yet sees himself forced to busy himself with it. This student is a falsification of the man. This, which may have sounded so stupefying when we first pronounced it, becomes the essential tragedy of the teaching profession, and in my judgment, the reform of education ought to begin with this brutal paradox. Because the activity itself, the activity in which teaching regulates, that we call studying, is mainly false, something that happens not as much emphasized as it should be, namely that in no order of life is the element of falsity so constant, so habitual, and so tolerated as it is in teaching. The student does not study, and if he does, putting in his so-called best, he does not learn. Let's see. And it is clear that the student, for whatever reason, does not learn. The professor cannot say that he's teaching, or at the very best, he is trying to teach but not succeeding. And so the terrible gap, which began at least a century ago, continues to grow. The gap between the living culture, genuine knowledge, and the ordinary man. Man will remain intact as he was, that is to say, an uncultured barbarian. Okay? In order for me to understand a science, it is not enough to study. It is also necessary that I should feel a genuine need for it, that I be truly preoccupied with its questions. Only then will I get to understand the answers that it gives. No one can thoroughly understand an answer unless he has understood the question to which it replies. fundamentally, true teaching of science is especially teaching the need for true scientific knowledge. I agree. There's real stuff that really matters. What causes diabetes? What causes hypertension? What causes atherosclerosis? Because you need to know that to help the patient. But memorizing endless books of minutia doesn't change anything for the patient. Estar is to be studying biology, but ser is to see yourself as a biologist. Yeah, and that's when I started getting good at school too, when I was at Stanford. When I decided I'm going to try to become great at biology, not just study biology, but maybe be a wildlife biologist. I wanted to be something better than my dad, a stuck-up doctor. So the point of it is, when you see yourself as becoming a biologist, you learn it much better than if you say, well, I'm just taking a biology class. Okay. Every living creature is happy when he fulfills his destiny, and that is when he realizes himself, when he is being that which in truth he is. Okay, soon after we begin living, we become aware of the confines of our prison. It takes us 30 years at most to recognize the limits to which our possibilities will move. We take stock of this reality like it is measuring the length of a chain that binds our feet, and then we say, is this life nothing more than this? Okay, so yeah, basically you got to play the ball wherever it is and just make the most of it, but you also have to accept where you're at. Anyways, I thought a couple things Gasset had to say were decent. I hope you found that helpful.